We have NewsNation's political director joining us with some insight on all of this now, Chris Stirewalt. Good to see you, Chris. To be serious, everybody thought, maybe not everybody, but some people thought they would get their act together because of what Mike was talking about. I mean, there's a war going on right now, and people said, we don't, let's get past this nonsense. But not quite yet, I guess.
Well, look, I think it's a huge progress for the Republicans that the first hurdle they had to surmount was whether or not they would have to get to the magic number just among themselves before they took it to the floor. But they didn't have to do that. They could just do a majority rules inside their own conference, and now they're going to take it out. You identified the exactly most important part, which is with Jim Jordan endorsing the guy who beat him.
Right.
Steve Scalise is on a glide path for this. Remember, conservatives like Steve Scalise, moderates are okay with Steve Scalise. Now, we are talking about those 8 folks who are sort of the MAGA or Fringo or it's personal or something, those folks who unhorsed Kevin McCarthy. If Matt Gaetz doesn't fight Steve Scalise, then I think Steve Scalise is going to have no problem at all. We'll see, though, what those folks demand, if there are any demands, if there's any horse trading that Scalise has to do before he gets there.
Then there becomes the challenge once he does get there that we talked about last time around if these rules don't change, right? I mean, maybe it's not Gaetz, but someone else could put Scalise in, pull a McCarthy, I guess it'll be called now. But we could end up back in this same situation, right? The rules in the House are still the same?
Well, the rules, assuming the
Yes.
rules remain the same in the new package, yes. The sword of Damocles hanging over the head of whoever becomes the speaker is a real problem for Republicans if it takes just one person. But they had 8 last time, so they would have surmounted the old bargain, which was 5. So that problem is there, and the Republican divisions are there. But what this has to work towards, and if Steve Scalise wants to be not only become speaker but remain speaker, the fundamental reform that those folks want, but also progressives want, and also a lot of mainstream Republicans want, is to let the House work its will, to let the committees work, to let a regular order prevail. That is the reform that Steve Scalise, something that John Boehner talked about many, many moons ago. If that's something that Steve Scalise can bring into effect, he will have a hard way to go, but he will have his conference behind him if he can do that.
Now, Scalise, he spoke to reporters earlier today, and they asked him, hey, what would you do? Or he volunteered what his first order of business would be, which would be a resolution in support of Israel. Now, my understanding is a resolution like that would be largely symbolic, important to some people, but symbolic nonetheless. What is your take or what is your feeling about how important having a House Speaker is to the Israeli war effort? I mean, I've heard varying degrees of how important it is and what the president can do without the Speaker, but how important is this?
Well, look, in the very short term, it's not very important at all. But as time ticks by, and remember, we're on a continuing resolution right now, that a 45-day continuing resolution, work on what comes next, including extra defense appropriations, including other things that are related to national security. The clock is running on that. There is urgency there. The most important part, though, I would say that the interrelationship between the war in the Middle East and what's going on Capitol Hill is not how what's happening here affects what's going on there, but how what's going on there affects the thinking of the people in Congress. What seemed like a stunt or a prank or worth doing, one of the people who voted against Kevin McCarthy, Nancy Mace, was walking the halls of Congress wearing a scarlet letter A on her chest to say that she was being victimized because she voted against Kevin McCarthy. And something like that looks funny or interesting or newsworthy when you're in the middle of peacetime and the stakes seem low, looks entirely different when there's a war on and there are Americans held hostage. So I think the effect here is that it sharpens and focuses the thinking of Republicans and makes them less willing to indulge in what the Nancy Maces of the world want to do.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I was thinking, and that's why. And I'm glad you came on. I don't want to put words in your mouth or even feelings, but it seemed like you're relatively optimistic. I guess, just me not knowing as much about the inner workings of Washington, become more skeptical when you hear, oh, there's not going to be a vote. Here we go again. But you seem to think that that this is a positive step forward, that they're just about there. Is that fair, Chris?
Yeah, look, this is they are just about there, but they were just about. Kevin McCarthy was just about there too, right? As you and Mike pointed out, 5 votes isn't very many votes, and this is a real problem. And we don't know what Scalise is going to face when he gets to the very end. But I would say right now, if I was laying odds in Vegas, I would be all the money would be piled up on the side of Steve's. Almost all the money. We'd leave one chip out on the other side for chaos. But I'd put $99 right there on Steve Scalise.
There's Marjorie Taylor Greene holding that chip as she said, "We get it back from her," the new speaker. What a mess. All right, Chris, we joke. Thank you, sir. Good.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.